The late afternoon light streamed through the wide studio windows, casting a golden glow over Isla's carefully curated workspace. Fabric swatches lay in neat stacks on the wooden table, their textures illuminated by the sun. A half-empty mug of tea sat beside her laptop, long gone cold, a silent casualty of her relentless schedule. The final design proposal for the Greystone Hotel renovation was submitted. The client had gushed over her vision, and for the first time in months, she exhaled without a deadline pressing against her ribs. She sank into the plush chair in the corner, the one she had reupholstered in a moment of creative impulse, and let her head tip back. A sense of accomplishment warmed her chest, but as the adrenaline faded, a familiar hollowness crept in. Work had become an all-consuming current, pulling her along, keeping her too busy to question whether she was happy or merely occupied. Her gaze drifted toward the bookshelf, where an old leather-bound album peeked out between stacks of interior design magazines. She hadn't looked through it in years. Slipping it from the shelf, she traced the cover with her fingertips before opening it, the pages crackling softly as she turned them. There she was, 7 years younger, in a lace gown that had taken her weeks to choose, standing beneath an arch of white roses, her smile wide and full of possibility. Elliot, beside her, looking both dashing and slightly terrified, as though he couldn't quite believe this was happening. She smiled, tilting the album toward the light, taking in the details, the delicate floral embroidery on her veil, the way the summer breeze had caught the hem of her dress. Then, her eyes flicked past the familiar and landed on something that made her stomach tighten. A man. He stood in the background of the photo, just beyond the wedding party, near the garden pathway lined with twinkling lanterns. She hadn't noticed him before, not once in all the time she had flipped through these pages. His presence was subtle but undeniable. Tall, dressed in dark formal wear, his face calm, unreadable. He wasn't looking at the camera, nor was he engaged in conversation with any of the guests. His focus was entirely on her. She frowned, flipping to another page. There he was again, in the periphery of the shot where she and Elliot shared their first dance. Again, near the edge of the frame, standing just beyond the celebration. His posture unchanged. His expression steady. Her fingers gripped the page as a chill ran down her spine. She turned another page. Then another. Her heartbeat quickened. Every single photo. Always there. Always near her. She scanned the images carefully, trying to recall if she had seen him that day. It had been a small wedding, intimate by design. She had agonized over the guest list, ensuring each name belonged to someone special, someone she knew. But this man, she didn't know him at all. She stared at his face, waiting for recognition to settle in, for some half-buried memory to surface. Nothing. A slow unease bloomed in her chest. Had he been an uninvited guest? A stranger who had wandered onto the venue unnoticed? But how could someone attend a wedding without anyone remembering them? And why had he positioned himself so close to her in every image, yet never interacting with anyone? She closed the album abruptly, her pulse thrumming in her ears. The studio, so familiar and safe moments ago, suddenly felt too quiet, the silence pressing against her skin. Standing abruptly, she crossed the room and grabbed her phone, hesitating only for a moment before pulling up Elliot's number. The call rang 3 times before his voice filled the receiver. "Hey," he said, his tone polite, distant. "Didn't expect to hear from you." She ignored the twinge of awkwardness that always accompanied their conversations now. "Elliot, do you still have the wedding photos?" There was a pause. Yeah. I think so." "Why?" She glanced back at the album, at the man she couldn't explain. "Can you check something for me? In the pictures, there's a guy, in the background. Always near me." Elliot sighed, the kind of sigh that carried a lifetime of knowing someone. "Isla, what is this about? I just need to know if he's in your copies too." There was a rustle on the other end of the line, the sound of a drawer opening, papers shifting. A long silence stretched between them before Elliot spoke again. There's no one in these pictures, Isla. Her breath caught. What? The only people here are our guests. I don't see anyone strange. She lowered the phone slowly, staring at the album as a sharp unease coiled in her stomach. The man was there. She could see him. Why couldn't Elliot? The more she looked, the more the unease grew. The man wasn't just there, he was there with intention. It wasn't like he had been caught mid-step on his way to the bar or caught in the background of a dance floor shot. He was positioned. Watching. Always close to her, always standing just far enough away to not belong, but never quite distant enough to be accidental. And yet, no one in the photos seemed to react to him. The guests were laughing, toasting, caught in half-spun conversations and twirls on the dance floor. Not a single glance in his direction. Not a single flicker of awareness. Isla leaned closer to the album, her fingers pressing into the pages. In one shot, he stood near the floral arch, as if he had arrived just as she and Elliot exchanged vows. In another, he was near the buffet table, untouched champagne flutes lining the counter beside him. Then, by the dance floor, where the string lights cast soft golden halos over swaying couples. The details of his face were shadowed in some shots, clearer in others. Strong features. Dark eyes. A solemn expression, one that never changed. She flipped to the next page. There he was again. Her stomach tightened. It was impossible to miss him now, as if the images had rearranged themselves to make him more obvious. Had he really been there all along, in every single picture? And how had she never noticed? She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry, and reached for her phone. The guest list. She had been meticulous about it, agonizing over it with Elliot until they could recite it in their sleep. It had been a small wedding, only close friends, family, a handful of colleagues. There was no way someone could have slipped in unnoticed. She opened the shared document on her phone, scrolling through the names, searching for anything that could explain his presence. But nothing stood out. She checked again. No unfamiliar last-minute additions. No one unaccounted for. Her fingers hovered over Elliot's name in her contacts. She hadn't spoken to him since their brief, stilted exchange earlier. But this was different. She didn't even know what this was. She hesitated, then called. Isla? Elliot sounded groggy, like he had just woken up. Everything okay? She didn't bother with pleasantries. You're sure you don't see him? In any of your copies? A pause. A sigh. Isla. I just need you to look again. I already did. Her grip on the phone tightened. Can you check now? He muttered something under his breath, the rustle of blankets audible through the receiver. She pictured him in his too modern apartment, sprawled on a couch instead of his bed, probably still wearing whatever he had worked in all day. He had always been like that, capable of falling asleep anywhere, never giving much thought to structure. It had driven her crazy. It had also made her love him, once. There was a pause as he presumably pulled up the files. Then, after a few moments, Isla, I don't know what you want me to say. There's no one here. Just our guests. Just us. She squeezed her eyes shut. That doesn't make sense. He exhaled, the kind of exhale that meant he was seconds away from deciding this wasn't his problem. Look, maybe. I have the album right in front of me. She flipped to another photo, one where the man was impossibly clear, his gaze locked on her even as she laughed at something Elliot had said. I'm looking at him right now. Elliot's voice was careful. Maybe there's a glitch? Something in the way your album was printed? You think I imagined him? I think, another sigh. I think you're doing that thing where you don't let something go until it's unraveled down to nothing. She gritted her teeth. This is different. Is it? Something sharp lodged itself in her chest. She wanted to fight him on it, tell him how wrong he was, but the weight of his exhaustion seeped through the phone. "Forget it," she muttered. "I'll figure it out myself." Before he could respond, she ended the call. She stared at the album again, her pulse an uneven rhythm in her throat. If Elliot wasn't seeing him, if the man wasn't in his copies, what did that mean? She needed to go further back. She searched her email for any original files from the photographer. There they were, high-resolution images, untouched, unedited. Her fingers trembled as she clicked through them. The man was still there. She scrolled through dozens of photos, zooming in where she could. His face was clear. Too clear. It wasn't that he was simply present, it was that he had always been there, waiting, lingering in the moments she had thought were hers alone. Who was he? She pulled up her wedding planner's contact, tapping out a quick message before she could second-guess herself. "Hey, weird question. Do you remember anyone at the wedding that wasn't on the guest list? A man, tall, dark suit, kind of solemn-looking. I just noticed him in some photos." She hit send, then stared at her phone, waiting for a response. Minutes passed. She got up, paced. Checked her messages again. Nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her screen lit up. "No, I don't remember anyone like that. Sorry." Everything was super controlled, so no way someone could have snuck in. "Let me know if you need me to check anything else." Isla sat back down, rubbing her temples. That was supposed to be the easy answer. A quick, "Oh, that's just Elliot's cousin," or "He was a +1." Something ordinary. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until she exhaled. There had to be another way to find out. She grabbed her laptop, fingers moving fast over the keyboard. Private forums for photographers weren't exactly her usual browsing territory, but she had spent enough time in creative spaces to know they existed. She found one quickly, an old-school message board, tucked into a quiet corner of the internet. It was filled with conversations about lighting techniques, film versus digital, candid shots versus posed. She clicked through threads, scanning for anything related to unexpected figures in wedding photos. Nothing relevant. She hesitated for only a second before uploading a cropped version of one of the images, keeping her description vague. Has anyone seen something like this before? This guy showed up in every single wedding photo, but no one remembers him being there. Trying to figure out if it's a camera issue or something else. She hit post. And then she waited. The reply appeared almost instantly. Isla hadn't even clicked away from the post before the notification popped up, her screen glowing with a single message. "Astrid Forsyth, I know him. He's been searching for you for years." A chill slid down her spine. She stared at the words, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The internet was full of people who enjoyed playing games, who thrived on taking something mundane and spinning it into something sinister just for the thrill of it. She knew that. But there was something about the way the message was written, plain, direct, without embellishment, that made it impossible to dismiss. Isla hesitated for a few seconds before typing a response. "Who is he?" The three little dots appeared immediately, vanishing and reappearing like the sender was carefully considering what to say. Then another message came through. "Astrid Forsyth, not something I can explain here. Meet me." Isla frowned. "Why would I do that? You could just tell me." Again, the dots. "Astrid Forsyth, I've seen you before. But not in a way you'd expect." Her fingers curled around the phone. This was ridiculous. She didn't have time to be chasing ghosts, to be meeting up with strangers from the internet who spoke in riddles. And yet, against all reason, a part of her believed this woman. Or at least, believed that she believed. She should ignore it. Block the user. Forget she ever posted anything at all. But instead, Isla found herself typing. Where? The response came almost immediately. Astrid Forsyth, the Whitmore Gallery. Tomorrow. 4 p.m. You'll understand when you get here. She should have ignored that too. But the next afternoon, Isla found herself standing in front of the Whitmore Gallery, staring up at the weathered sign above the entrance. It was a small place, nestled between a coffee shop and an antique bookstore, the kind of gallery that didn't try too hard to invite people in. The windows were lined with soft, diffused lighting, and beyond the glass, she could see framed paintings and photographs arranged in a quiet, deliberate way. She almost turned around. Almost convinced herself this was a waste of time, a joke, some elaborate trick played by an online stranger with too much time on their hands. But then the door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was younger than Isla had expected, mid-30s maybe, with deep brown eyes and cropped hair streaked with silver at the temples. She wore paint-splattered jeans and an oversized linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal delicate inked patterns along her forearms. Her expression was unreadable. You came. Isla folded her arms. You didn't give me much choice. Astrid studied her, tilting her head slightly. You think this is a joke? I think this is a waste of time. A ghost of a smile crossed Astrid's lips. Then come inside. If you still think that in 10 minutes, you can leave. Isla hesitated, then followed her through the door. The gallery was cool and quiet, the air tinged with the faint scent of paint and something older, aged paper, maybe, or dust settled in forgotten corners. The walls were lined with framed photographs and oil paintings, some vibrant and modern, others faded with time. Astrid led her toward the back, past the main displays, to a smaller room Isla hadn't noticed before. The walls were covered in portraits. They weren't displayed like an exhibit. There were no descriptions, no spotlights drawing attention to specific pieces. Just row after row of photographs and paintings, arranged with an almost obsessive precision. And in every single one, there was a bride. Some were oil paintings from centuries past, their subjects dressed in corseted gowns with lace collars. Others were black and white photographs, capturing brides in soft focus lighting, their veils blurred like mist. There were modern ones too, crisp and detailed, showing women in contemporary dresses, bouquets clutched in their hands. Isla stepped closer, scanning the faces, and that's when she saw him. The man from her wedding photos. Standing just behind a bride in a painting from the 1800s, his face partially obscured by shadows. At the edge of a black and white photograph from the 1920s, standing near the altar. Behind a woman in a more recent portrait, his gaze locked on her as she looked at the camera, smiling, unaware. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned to Astrid. What is this? This, Astrid said, voice quiet, is what I was trying to tell you. Isla shook her head. No, I don't, this isn't possible. Astrid walked over to one of the frames, reaching out to touch the glass with the tips of her fingers. Every bride in this room noticed him after their wedding. Just like you. And when they tried to find out who he was, they realized no one else remembered him. Isla swallowed, the back of her neck prickling. Who is he? That's the question, isn't it? Astrid turned to her. I don't know. I wish I did. But what I do know is that he's been showing up in wedding photos for decades. Maybe longer. And he always stands near the bride. A cold knot formed in Isla's stomach. She turned back to the images, her eyes scanning the faces of the women, wondering if they had felt the same creeping unease, the same sinking fear. She exhaled sharply. Why me? Astrid studied her, then said simply, because he's been looking for you. Some brides never noticed him. They flipped through their albums, reminiscing about their wedding day, completely unaware of the figure lingering just behind them. But the ones who did, the ones who saw him, were never the same. Astrid spoke in the same calm, deliberate way she had when Isla first walked into the gallery. as if she were describing the weather rather than unraveling something deeply unsettling. She moved through the small room lined with portraits, her fingers grazing the frames as she spoke. They've all described similar things, Astrid continued. Dreams they couldn't explain. Places they had never been, but somehow remembered. Lost time, entire hours slipping by without recollection. Some say they started seeing him in other places, not just the wedding photos. Reflections, crowds, windows. Always watching. Isla stared at the images, her mind trying to catch up. It was too much, too absurd, too ridiculous to even entertain. And yet, something inside her tightened. A small, insistent feeling she couldn't shake. She exhaled slowly, arms crossed. You're saying this like it's fact. Astrid's eyes flicked to her. It is. A sharp laugh escaped before Isla could stop it. No offense, but do you hear yourself? You're talking about, what, a ghost? Some kind of supernatural wedding crasher? Astrid didn't flinch. I'm talking about something real. Real things can be explained. Can they? Astrid turned fully toward her. Explain why he's in your wedding photos but not Elliot's. Isla opened her mouth, then shut it. Astrid took a step closer. Explain why your planner, your guests, everyone who was there, remembers nothing about him. The knot in Isla's stomach twisted. This was absurd. And yet, she had felt something when she saw him in the photos. Something more than just fear or confusion. Something almost familiar. She looked back at the images. The bride stared at her from behind glass, their expressions frozen in time. Some smiling. Some solemn. Some caught mid-laugh. And behind them, always him. Isla shook her head. This is insane. Astrid watched her carefully. Then leave. Forget about it. Isla's fingers dug into her arms. She wanted to. She wanted to walk out of this gallery, delete the photos, pretend none of this had ever happened. But the familiarity was there. The sense that she had seen him before, not just in her own wedding pictures, but somewhere else, somewhere deeper than memory. Astrid sighed, tilting her head as if weighing something. There's a place. Outside of town. An old cathedral. What about it? If you really want answers, you'll go there. Isla frowned. And find what, exactly? Astrid hesitated, then said, something that belongs to you. A cold shiver traced Isla's spine. Astrid grabbed a piece of paper from a nearby desk, scrawled something onto it, and handed it over. The address. I don't do ghost hunts, Isla said flatly. Good. Astrid's lips twitched. This isn't one. Isla glanced down at the paper, at the inked letters. The weight of the conversation pressed heavy against her ribs. She should throw it away. Walk out of here and never think about this again. But she didn't. The drive out of town was longer than Isla expected. The cathedral was nowhere near the picturesque kind, the ones that stood proudly in city centers or hosted extravagant ceremonies with string quartets and flower-covered aisles. This one was tucked away past winding roads and overgrown fields, a structure that looked like it had been forgotten. She parked in front of the iron gate, its hinges rusted, its once grand archway draped in ivy. The stone walls stretched upward, their once white surface weathered to an almost grayish hue. It wasn't abandoned, but it certainly wasn't thriving. She sat in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the entrance. This was ridiculous. She wasn't the kind of person who went on mysterious errands based on cryptic instructions from strangers. She was rational. Logical. And yet, here she was, because she couldn't let it go. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and pushed the gate open. The courtyard was empty, save for a few wooden benches that looked like they hadn't been sat on in years. Birds fluttered past, their wings startling against the quiet. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself as she stepped inside. The cathedral was dimly lit, its high ceilings lined with wooden beams, the air thick with the scent of old books and something vaguely floral, perhaps the remnants of past ceremonies. A few rows of pews stretched toward the altar, but there was no one in sight. "Hello?" Her voice echoed slightly. After a moment, a door creaked open near the back, and an older woman appeared, her gray cardigan hanging loosely over a long dress. She eyed Isla with curiosity, setting down a stack of papers on a wooden desk. "You're here for the records," the woman said, more statement than question. Isla hesitated. "Yes. I was hoping to look at past wedding archives." The woman nodded, motioning for Isla to follow her through a side passage. "We don't get many requests for those anymore," she said as they walked. "Most people like to keep things digital these days." The corridor smelled of dust and parchment, and when they reached the small office at the end, Isla felt like she had stepped into a different decade. Wooden filing cabinets lined the walls, their labels faded from years of handling. A large desk sat in the middle of the room, cluttered with stacks of old documents. The woman gestured to a section of shelves. "Everything's organized by decade. You're welcome to look through them." Isla nodded, murmuring a quick thank you as she stepped closer. She had no idea what she was looking for. Her fingers trailed over the spines of the old ledgers, pulling out one from the last 20 years. The pages were thick, the ink slightly smudged from time. She skimmed past names, dates, small notes about ceremonies held within these walls. None of them meant anything to her. She reached for another book. And another. The entries blurred together, until something made her pause. Her own name. She blinked. There, neatly written in ink, was her name alongside a date she knew all too well. The date of her wedding. Her stomach twisted. This had to be a mistake. She wasn't married here. She had never even been to this place before today. Her hand tightened around the edge of the book as she turned the page. And then she saw it. A photo. Her breath caught in her throat. It was her wedding photo. But not quite. The dress was the same, the bouquet identical. Elliot stood beside her, but the setting was wrong. Instead of the outdoor venue she remembered, the backdrop was the very altar she had just walked past moments ago. The stained glass windows cast a golden hue over the scene. Her pulse pounded. And then she saw him. The man. He stood just beside her, where a bridesmaid should have been, close enough to be part of the moment but far enough to be separate from it. His expression was calm, almost expectant. She stared at her own face in the image. It was her. But not quite. The woman in the picture looked like her, same eyes, same features, but there was something slightly off, something she couldn't name. A wrongness that made her chest tighten. She slammed the book shut. Her heart raced as she glanced toward the woman at the desk, who had barely looked up from her work. Isla pressed her fingers to her temple, willing herself to breathe. This wasn't possible. She needed to get out of here. Her hands were shaking. The book felt heavier than it should have as she clutched it to her chest, the old leather pressing into her palm. The room felt smaller, the air thick with dust and something else she couldn't name. The woman at the desk barely looked up, flipping through papers with the kind of patience that came from years of routine. Isla couldn't stay here. She turned abruptly, pushing through the wooden door and stepping into the main hall of the cathedral. Her footsteps echoed against the stone floors, each one feeling too loud, too final. The walls, lined with stained glass, cast patterns of color along the aisle, but all she saw was the image from the book burned into her mind. Her wedding photo. But not. The man standing beside her. Watching. Always watching. Her breath came faster. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be finding things that didn't make sense. She pushed through the heavy cathedral doors and stepped into the open air. The sunlight should have been grounding, should have reminded her that she was in the real world, that she wasn't losing her grip on reality. But as her eyes adjusted to the brightness, her stomach dropped. He was there. Standing across the street. Not moving. Not speaking. Just watching. A shiver crawled up her spine. It was different from seeing him in the photos. Those were frozen moments, strange but still confined to the past. But this was now. Her pulse pounded as she took a step back, her heel catching on the uneven stone of the church steps. Her hands clenched into fists. She blinked. And he was gone. The street was empty. No sound, no movement, just the rustling of trees in the distance. Her chest heaved. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the street, the sidewalk, the parking lot. Nothing. Her breath came sharp and shallow as she hurried to her car, fumbling with the keys. The door creaked as she wrenched it open, her hands trembling as she slid into the driver's seat. She locked the doors. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel, knuckles turning white as she forced herself to inhale. Exhale. Inhale. He had been there. He had been there. She wasn't imagining it. The cathedral loomed behind her, its stone facade casting a long shadow over the pavement. She didn't look back. She turned the key in the ignition and drove away. She barely remembered the drive back. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of her, but her mind remained stuck in that moment. The stillness of him. The way he had been standing there, as if he had been waiting for her. By the time she reached her studio, her body was tight with exhaustion, every nerve frayed. She stepped inside, locking the door behind her before she even turned on the lights. The room was familiar, her desk cluttered with swatches and blueprints from the project she had been working on. It should have made her feel normal again. It didn't. She dropped her bag onto the nearest chair and ran a hand through her hair. She needed to shake this. She needed sleep, or a distraction, or something to convince herself that she wasn't spiraling into paranoia. A small, cream-colored envelope sat on her desk. Her breath hitched. She hadn't seen it when she walked in. It had no postage, no name, no return address. She reached for it carefully, her fingers curling around the edge of the paper. She opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Her wedding photo. Her hands turned to ice. It was identical to the image she had seen in the cathedral's records. Same dress, same pose, same moment frozen in time. Except now, a red circle had been drawn around his face. The ink bled slightly into the paper, stark against the muted tones of the photograph. Her knees threatened to give out. Her stomach twisted so tightly she thought she might be sick. The air around her felt too thick, too charged, as if the walls were pressing in. Someone had left this for her. Someone wanted her to see it. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she turned in a slow, hesitant circle, scanning the room. The blinds were closed. The door was locked. The silence was unbearable. She looked back at the photograph. The red circle pulsed in her vision. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't imagining him. And someone else knew it too. The photograph sat on her desk like it had been there all along, like it belonged among the fabric swatches and sketches, between her planner and the empty coffee cups. But it didn't. It didn't belong anywhere. There was no note. No message scrawled on the back. No explanation for why it had arrived at her studio, how someone had left it without her noticing. Just the photo, her wedding photo, with the man's face circled in red. She picked it up again, her fingers gripping the edges, careful not to smudge the ink. The more she looked, the more absurd it became. Who had sent it? Someone else who had seen him. Someone who knew what was happening. Or worse, was it from him? She paced the room, phone in hand, debating who to call. Astrid? No. She wasn't ready to hear more cryptic warnings. The police? What would she even say? Hi, someone mailed me a photo of my own wedding? That would go well. Which left Elliot. The idea of calling him made her stomach twist, but she needed to see his reaction. Maybe, against all logic, he would remember something. Maybe the right expression on his face would tell her she wasn't losing it. She grabbed her keys, tucked the envelope into her bag, and left the studio before she could talk herself out of it. Elliot opened the door, his expression shifting the moment he saw her. Surprise, then hesitation, then something else, something guarded. Isla. He leaned against the doorframe. Didn't expect you to show up at my place. She didn't bother with small talk. I need to show you something. His brows lifted slightly, but he stepped aside, letting her in. His apartment was exactly how she remembered, minimalist to the point of looking unfinished, like he had moved in yesterday and might leave tomorrow. The furniture was neutral, the walls bare except for a single framed photograph of a city skyline. She pulled the envelope from her bag and handed it to him. Look at this. Elliot sighed, taking it like he was already exhausted by the conversation. He slid the photo out, studying it for a second before shaking his head. Okay, he said slowly. It's our wedding picture. She exhaled sharply. Look closer. His eyes flicked back to the image. A pause. Then another shake of his head. I don't. The man. The one in the background. The one in the red circle. You don't see him? Elliot frowned. Isla, I don't know what you're. Come on, Elliot. She stepped closer, pointing. Right there. He's in the middle of the picture. Standing next to me. Staring at me. How do you not see him? His jaw tensed. He set the photo down on the kitchen counter, rubbing a hand over his face. This is what you came here for? Did you not hear what I just said? He let out a slow breath. I don't know what's going on with you, but you need to stop obsessing over this. You're driving yourself crazy. She clenched her fists. I'm not crazy. You've been stressed, he said, his voice forced into something gentler, like he thought talking softer would make her agree with him. Work has been non-stop, and I know you. You get fixated on things. You don't let them go until you've torn them apart. Her pulse pounded. This isn't about work. Then what is it about? She opened her mouth, then shut it. How was she supposed to explain any of this? The cathedral. The records. The way the man had been standing across the street, watching her. The fact that Elliot was looking at this photo and seeing nothing unusual. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Forget it. Elliot ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to say something else but thought better of it. He pushed the photograph back toward her. Isla, please. Let this go. She snatched it off the counter, stuffing it back into the envelope. Thanks for the help. She walked out without another word. The street was quiet as she drove back, but her mind wasn't. Elliot hadn't seen him. Not in the wedding photos. Not in the circled image. Not anywhere. It wasn't just that he didn't remember the man, it was like the man didn't exist at all. The unease curled tighter in her stomach. She pulled into the parking lot of her studio but didn't get out of the car. Instead, she reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Astrid's number. The phone rang twice before Astrid answered. I was wondering when you'd call, Astrid said, like she had been expecting this. Isla swallowed. I need to talk to you. A pause. Then, in that same calm, steady voice. He's been waiting for you to remember. Her grip tightened on the phone. What does that mean? You already know. A chill ran down her spine. She wanted to argue, to tell Astrid she was wrong, that she didn't know anything. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the panic, Astrid was right. Isla sat in the dim glow of her laptop, the cursor blinking in silent expectation. The words Astrid had spoken still echoed in her head, weaving themselves into something larger, something she wasn't ready to face. He's been waiting for you to remember. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Remember what? Her wedding had been beautiful, intimate, meticulously planned. She remembered every detail, down to the scent of the flowers and the way Elliot's hands had trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. There was nothing to remember beyond that. And yet, the man was there. Always there. She exhaled sharply, shaking off the chill creeping up her spine. She needed facts. Proof. Something tangible to explain why she was seeing him when no one else could. She typed into the search bar, wedding photos, unknown man appearing. Pages of irrelevant results popped up, photobombing wedding guests, ghost stories designed for clicks, blurry images of alleged apparitions. Nothing useful. She refined her search. Brides report seeing the same man in wedding photos. The results narrowed. A few articles stood out. She clicked the first one. Bride discovers unknown guest in wedding photos, a hoax or something more? The article recounted the story of a woman in Chicago who had noticed an unfamiliar man in the background of her wedding photos, standing just behind her in multiple shots. No one remembered inviting him. No one even recalled seeing him that day. Isla's pulse quickened as she scrolled through the comments. One stood out. This happened to my sister. The same man. He was in her photos too. It ruined her marriage. She wouldn't talk about it, but she was never the same after she saw him. Isla swallowed. She clicked another article. And another. Different brides, different weddings, but the same story. A man. Always watching. Never remembered. She scrolled further, following the scattered mentions, until something new caught her eye. A forum thread. Have you seen him in your wedding photos? She clicked. The post stretched back years. Dozens of people claiming they had seen a figure in their pictures. Some dismissed it as a trick of the light, a double exposure, a prank. But others were convinced it was something else. One post, from 3 years ago, stood out. My grandmother told me about him when I was little. She used to work at an estate that hosted weddings. She said she saw him many times. Not just in photos, but in person. She said he didn't belong to any single moment, he belonged to all of them. Isla's breath caught. An estate. She scrolled down. A response had been left a few months later. Was this in Westfield? My great-aunt worked at a wedding venue there in the 60s and said the same thing. The place has been abandoned for decades, but people still say they see things when they go there. She grabbed a notepad, scribbling the words down. Westfield. Abandoned wedding venue. Her hands were trembling. She switched tabs and searched. It didn't take long to find it. The Westfield estate. Once one of the most sought-after wedding venues in the state, now an empty shell, its halls left to decay. The property had been sold years ago, but no one had done anything with it. No one had gotten married there since 1972. Her stomach twisted. She didn't want to go. She was going anyway. Underscore 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 underscore. The drive to Westfield felt impossibly long. The roads grew quieter the farther she went, the houses thinning into stretches of trees and overgrown fields. The estate wasn't even marked on her GPS. She had to follow an old address from an archived article. When she arrived, the gate was already open, rusted metal bent out of shape. The driveway, once lined with flowers, was cracked and littered with leaves. The house itself loomed ahead, its grand exterior faded, its windows dark. She parked, gripping the wheel for a moment before stepping out. The air was thick with the scent of earth and rain, the sky overcast. The grass was wild, reclaiming the land. She walked carefully toward the entrance, her footsteps muffled by the damp ground. The doors, tall and wooden, were slightly ajar. She pushed them open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust. The grand staircase at the center of the hall had once been regal. She could picture it covered in white petals, a bride descending with all eyes on her. Now, the railing was chipped, the steps worn. She moved forward cautiously, her heartbeat steady but strong. A long hallway stretched ahead, lined with doorways. She stepped into the first room. The walls were lined with mirrors. She hesitated, taking a slow step inside. Dust covered the floor, undisturbed. The furniture had been draped with white sheets long ago, the fabric yellowed with time. A grand piano sat in the corner, its lid half open, strings rusted. She ran a finger along the edge, feeling the dust collect on her skin. Then she saw it. A single photograph. Not framed. Not hung on the wall. Just sitting there, propped against the mirror. She picked it up. A bride. A groom. A moment captured in time. And standing just behind them. Him. Her breath caught. This was real. He had been here. The drive was reckless. She barely registered the passing trees, the flickering streetlights, the growing emptiness as she left the city behind. Her hands gripped the wheel too tightly, her heart a wild rhythm in her chest. Every rational part of her brain screamed at her to turn around, to stop chasing shadows. But the other part, the part that had felt his presence before she had ever seen him, the part that knew, somehow, that this was bigger than a series of strange coincidences, kept pushing her forward. By the time she reached the estate, night had settled in. The abandoned house loomed ahead, its dark windows like watching eyes. The air smelled of damp earth, of something old and undisturbed. The wind stirred the overgrown grass, whispering through the trees. She parked, staring at the house, trying to slow her breathing. She should leave. She got out of the car. The front door, heavy with age, groaned as she pushed it open. The stale air met her like a held breath, thick with dust and time. She moved carefully, the wooden floors creaking beneath her weight. The house was cavernous, its grand entrance leading into hallways that stretched into darkness. The remnants of its past still clung to the edges, the ghost of a chandelier overhead, the faint outlines of paintings removed from the walls, the scent of something floral long since faded. She took a step forward. Something shifted in the silence. A door, slightly ajar, further down the hall. Her pulse pounded as she approached. The room was large, the walls lined with tall shelves. Boxes and old trunks were stacked haphazardly, their contents spilling onto the floor. And then, on the farthest wall, she saw them. Hundreds of wedding photos. Her breath caught. They were pinned in careful rows, spanning decades, maybe more. The images were yellowed, some curling at the edges, others crisp and new. Different women. Different dresses. Different eras. But always, always him. The man. Standing just behind them. She took a step closer, scanning the faces. Some of the brides were smiling, some laughing, some solemn. None of them seemed to know he was there. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a photograph, the edges soft from time. The woman in the image wore a gown from the 1920s, her veil delicate, beaded. And just behind her, in the shadow of the altar, there he was. She looked at another. And another. The same man. The same gaze. Waiting. A chill slid down her spine. The air shifted behind her. A voice, low and steady, cut through the silence. You've always been my bride. Her body locked in place. The room felt too small, the walls pressing inward, the air suddenly thick and humming. She didn't turn. She couldn't. The voice was close. Right behind her. The room pressed in around her. The photographs on the walls, the dust clinging to the air, the overwhelming weight of time, it all felt distant, insignificant compared to the presence behind her. She hadn't moved. Her body refused. The voice, steady, certain, unervingly calm, still vibrated in her bones. You've always been my bride. Her breath came too fast, too shallow. Her pulse pounded at the base of her throat. She forced herself to turn. The man stood just a few feet away. He was taller than she had imagined, his frame lean but solid, dressed in a dark suit that looked neither modern nor old-fashioned, as though he existed outside of trends, outside of time. His features were sharp, his hair dark, his eyes an impossible shade of gray, deep and knowing, as if he had already read every thought rushing through her head. And he was familiar. Not in the way she had seen him in photographs, not in the way one recognizes a face from a fleeting memory, but in a way that made something deep inside her lurch with a terrifying certainty. She knew him. Somewhere beyond logic, beyond reason, she knew him. Her throat tightened. Who are you? His expression didn't change. If anything, there was a flicker of something almost like relief. You remember, he said, though it wasn't a question. She took a step back. I don't. His gaze softened, just slightly. You will. The floor felt unsteady beneath her. Tell me who you are. He tilted his head, studying her as though she had just asked him something ridiculous. As if she were the one who should already understand. Then, finally. Alistair. The name hit her like an impact, knocking something loose in her mind. It shouldn't mean anything. And yet. Her stomach twisted. That doesn't, she swallowed, forcing steel into her voice. That doesn't tell me who you are. A ghost of a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. Doesn't it? Her nails dug into her palms. How do you know me? He took a slow step closer. Not aggressive, not threatening, just enough to make her feel the shift in space, the way the air between them seemed to crackle. I've always known you, he said simply. A chill curled at the base of her spine. He said it as if it were obvious. As if it were inevitable. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog in her thoughts. That's not an answer. I know you, Isla. His voice was calm, steady. I know that you fell out of a tree when you were 7 and broke your wrist, and you told your mother you had been pushed by the wind so you wouldn't get in trouble. Her breath hitched. I know that you used to draw houses in the margins of your notebooks at school, and when you got older, you told everyone you wanted to be an architect before you realized you didn't care about blueprints, you cared about making places feel like they belonged to someone. Her chest tightened. I know you hated thunderstorms as a child, but you never admitted it. I know you still tuck your feet under the covers at night, even in the summer, because you don't like the feeling of open air at the end of the bed. Her hands curled into fists. This wasn't real. This was a trick, a carefully calculated illusion, a rehearsed performance. It had to be. You're lying, she said, though the words tasted wrong on her tongue. He took another step, slow, deliberate. No. She was shaking. How do you know these things? Alistair didn't answer. He just watched her, waiting. Waiting for something she couldn't name. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Isla's pulse roared in her ears. Alistair stood still, watching her, his presence as unshakable as the walls lined with decades of forgotten brides. She forced herself to speak. How do you know these things about me? His head tilted slightly, the way someone might regard a long-lost object finally returned to them. Because we were promised to each other before you were born. Her stomach lurched. A laugh, sharp, breathless, disbelieving, escaped her lips. That's insane. Alistair didn't flinch. It's the truth. No, she shook her head, stepping back. I don't know you. I have never known you. You did, he said calmly. And you will again. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. I'm married, she spat, grasping for anything that made sense, anything that anchored her to reality. I was married to Elliot. I had a wedding. I had a life. You, she gestured wildly at him, her voice rising. You weren't there. His gaze darkened, something unreadable flickering in the depth of his eyes. I was. A sharp pressure built in her skull. She clutched at her temples as something flickered behind her eyes. A woman, standing in a field of white roses. Her hands lifted, fingers lacing with someone else's. She couldn't see his face, but she felt something. Something warm. Something familiar. The image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless, swaying slightly. Her stomach twisted violently. She didn't know what was worse, the idea that Alistair was lying, or the possibility that he wasn't. No, she whispered. A shadow of something sad passed over his face. You've forgotten. But your heart hasn't. It was too much. She turned and ran. The photographs on the walls blurred as she sprinted past them, her only focus on reaching the door, getting out, putting as much distance between herself and that voice as possible. The cold night air hit her like a slap when she burst outside. She stumbled toward her car, hands shaking so badly she fumbled the keys. When she finally managed to unlock the door, she threw herself inside, locking it behind her. Her breathing was uneven, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. In the rearview mirror, the house loomed behind her. She expected to see him standing in the doorway, watching her. But he wasn't there. She didn't wait to see if he would be. The tires screeched against the gravel as she sped down the empty road. The city blurred past her as she drove, headlights casting fleeting glows on wet pavement. The rain had come out of nowhere, fine and misty, coating the windshield in thin sheets. Isla barely noticed. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, her mind racing with her mother's words, with the image of her father's face, tense and unreadable. A stillborn daughter who might not have been gone. A family secret buried so deeply it had taken 3 decades and a stranger to unearth it. She didn't know where she was going until she was already there. Westfield Estate loomed ahead, dark and waiting. She pulled up to the house, cutting the engine, the quiet settling in thick and heavy. Her breath came uneven as she stepped out of the car, the air cold against her skin. The rain had eased, leaving only the damp smell of earth and wood as she pushed through the front door. The house was silent. But she knew he was here. Her footsteps echoed against the old wooden floor as she moved through the grand, empty space. The wedding photos still lined the walls, the faces of the past watching her. Then, at the end of the hall, she saw him. Alistair stood near the staircase, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression unreadable. The sight of him sent a ripple through her, something deep and unexplainable, something that lived beneath thought. She stopped a few feet away, her chest rising and falling too quickly. Who was she? Her voice was raw. The girl my mother lost. Who was she? Alistair didn't answer right away. He studied her, as if deciding how much to say, how much she could handle. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady. She was you. A sharp breath tore from her lungs. Her hands curled into fists. That's not possible. Alistair tilted his head slightly. Isn't it? Her stomach clenched. You're saying what? Came back? That I was supposed to be her? His gaze softened. You are her, Isla. Just, not in the way you think. Her pulse roared in her ears. This is insane, she whispered. Alistair stepped closer, slow, deliberate, careful not to startle her. Do you remember what I told you? She swallowed. We made a promise, he said, voice quiet but certain. A vow that we would always find each other. No matter where. No matter when. Her throat tightened. Why? Something flickered in his expression, something like longing, something like grief. Because we've done this before. She shook her head. No. Yes, he said. Many times. The room tilted slightly, her knees unsteady. Weddings. She thought of the photographs lining the walls, of the decades of women, of the same man standing behind them all. You were looking for me, she murmured. I've always been looking for you. A shiver crawled over her skin. She thought of the way he had always been there, just behind her in the wedding pictures, watching, waiting. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What are you waiting for? His gaze didn't waver. The moment our bond is complete. The words sent a jolt through her chest. She didn't know what terrified her more, the certainty in his voice, or the part of her that almost understood. The world had tilted. Everything Isla thought she knew had been yanked out from under her, leaving nothing solid to hold on to. Alistair stood in front of her, steady, calm, patient. As if he'd been waiting for this conversation for centuries. Maybe he had. She shook her head, stepping back. You keep saying we made a promise. That we've done this before. But I don't remember any of it. Something flickered across his face, not anger, not frustration, but something sadder. I know, he said simply. Her stomach twisted. Then how do you expect me to believe you? His eyes didn't leave hers. Because part of you already does. Her breath caught. No, she said quickly. That's not. But her voice wavered. Because deep down, there was something. A pull, an ache, a familiarity she couldn't explain. She felt it in the way her chest tightened when she looked at him. In the way his voice settled into her bones like an echo of something half-forgotten. She hated it. She turned away, her hands pressing against her temples. This is ridiculous. You feel it, don't you? She squeezed her eyes shut. Stop. You don't have to force yourself to remember, he said, his voice quiet. It will come. She opened her mouth to argue, to tell him none of this was real, but the words caught in her throat. Because suddenly, she wasn't standing in the abandoned estate anymore. She was somewhere else. Somewhere older. She was in a field, the scent of jasmine thick in the air. The sky stretched wide above her, the golden light of dusk washing over everything. She wore a gown, pale and delicate, the fabric soft against her skin. And she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, his fingers laced with hers. She turned to look at him. And saw Alistair. The vision snapped away like a rubber band. Isla stumbled backward, her pulse hammering in her ears. Alistair hadn't moved, but his gaze was knowing. What did you see? She couldn't speak. Her breath was shallow, her fingers trembling at her sides. That wasn't real. That was just her mind playing tricks on her. But another wave hit her, sudden and sharp. A candlelit ballroom, music swaying through the air. Her hands pressed against Alistair's chest as they danced, his breath warm against her cheek. Then another. A quiet chapel, her hand in his, a whispered vow passing between them. Then another. A storm, wind howling through the trees, his arms around her, his voice urgent in her ear, we'll find each other again. The visions slammed into her one after another, each one dropping her deeper into something she didn't understand, something that felt both impossible and inevitable. She gasped, the room around her snapping back into place. Her knees nearly gave out. Alistair was watching her carefully, waiting. Her chest heaved. What? Her voice cracked. What was that? He took a slow step forward. You're remembering. No. No, that wasn't possible. But her body betrayed her, because deep in her bones, something inside her whispered. Yes. Isla pressed her hands against the bathroom sink, her breath coming too fast. The mirror reflected her wide eyes, her pale face, the way her fingers gripped the porcelain so tightly they ached. This wasn't happening. She turned the faucet on, splashing cold water onto her face. The shock helped for a second, but as soon as she closed her eyes, she saw it again, golden fields stretching into the horizon, the weight of a lace veil against her skin, a hand intertwined with hers. Alistair's hand. Her stomach twisted. She needed to stop this. She needed something real, something solid to hold on to. Elliot. She grabbed her phone and called before she could talk herself out of it. He picked up after 2 rings, his voice groggy. Isla? She hesitated, suddenly aware of how ridiculous this would sound. Hey, she said, forcing her voice to steady. Can I come over? A pause. It's late. I know. She closed her eyes, grounding herself in the sound of his voice. I just need to be somewhere normal. Elliot sighed, but she heard the shift of blankets, the quiet creak of his bed as he sat up. Yeah. Okay. The relief was instant. I'll be there soon. She left the bathroom light on as she walked out. Elliot's apartment smelled the same as always, faintly of coffee, of the linen spray he used on his sheets, of the peppermint gum he always kept in his pockets. He watched her as she curled up on the couch, one leg tucked under the other. You want to tell me what's going on? She hesitated. I just needed a reset. He exhaled through his nose. Is this about the photo thing again? She didn't answer. He ran a hand through his hair. You're spiraling, Isla. I know, she whispered. His expression softened, and for a second, she thought he might reach for her, but he didn't. He just sat beside her, close but not touching. Stay as long as you need, he said finally. She nodded, pressing her cheek against the couch cushion. She could still fix this. She just needed to sleep, to be in a familiar space, to let Elliot's quiet presence remind her who she was. She just needed everything to stay still. But everything did the opposite. She woke up disoriented, Elliot's apartment dissolving into something unfamiliar. She wasn't on the couch anymore, she was standing, barefoot, on cool stone. A ballroom stretched before her, chandeliers flickering above, guests dressed in fine silks and suits drifting around her like a dream. She looked down. Her gown was pale blue, embroidered with tiny pearls. A hand touched her waist. She turned, her pulse hammering. Alistair. He wasn't watching her the way he had before, with quiet patience and knowing. He was looking at her like he had just found something he thought he had lost. Isla, he murmured. Her breath caught. Then the ballroom blurred, melting away like ink in water, and she gasped awake, her body jolting upright. Elliot stirred beside her. What's wrong? Her chest heaved. She looked around, the apartment dim, safe, normal. Nothing. Just a dream. Elliot groaned and rolled onto his side. Go back to sleep. But she didn't. Because something had changed. She felt it in her bones, in the way the air pressed against her skin, in the way her heartbeat still raced as if she wasn't fully back. Something was shifting. The next morning, things started slipping. She left her keys in the fridge and put the milk in her purse. She signed a client email with a name that wasn't hers. She called her mother's number only to realize she was dialing one that hadn't existed in decades. And the memories kept coming. Not just in dreams. In daylight. In moments when she wasn't expecting them. She reached for a cup of coffee in her studio and, suddenly, she was lifting a porcelain teacup in a sunlit garden. She stepped into the shower and, for a fleeting second, felt the weight of a corset being tightened around her waist. She looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize her own face. Her real life was dissolving at the edges, and something else was replacing it. And Alistair. He was everywhere. She saw him standing at the corner of the street, disappearing when she blinked. She felt him in the studio, his presence thick in the air even when she was alone. And then the house. The doors started locking themselves. The windows wouldn't open. Objects shifted without reason. Her wedding album, the one she had shoved into a drawer, determined to forget, lay open on the counter, flipped to a photo where Alistair was standing just behind her. The walls of her life were bending, reshaping. And no matter how hard she tried to hold on to the pieces, they kept slipping through her fingers. Elliot didn't say it outright, but she could feel it in the way he looked at her. Like she was slipping. Like she was something strange, something unrecognizable. She couldn't blame him. She had tried to explain, I keep seeing things. I keep remembering things that aren't mine. She had said his name carefully, watching for recognition. Alistair. But Elliot had only frowned, shifting uncomfortably. You're obsessing over nothing, Isla. Nothing. She had laughed, sharp and bitter. You don't see it, do you? I see you unraveling, he had said. And maybe she was. The distance between them grew in ways that weren't loud. He still picked up when she called, but there was hesitation before he answered. He still made coffee when she stayed over, but he didn't pour her a cup. The weight of it settled in her chest like a stone, the slow, careful unraveling of something that had once been certain. But certainty wasn't real anymore. Because Alistair was. And she had to know the truth. She drove without thinking, without questioning, past the lights of the city, past the open stretches of road until she reached Westfield. The house was waiting. The walls breathed with age, with something thick and unseen curling through the corridors. She didn't hesitate this time. She stepped inside, and Alistair was already there. He stood at the end of the hallway, the way he always did. Waiting. Her heart pounded. Tell me everything. He didn't ask if she was sure. He only nodded, then turned, leading her deeper into the house. The room was colder than the rest of the estate, lined with shelves, dust thick in the air. At the center, on a table smoothed by time, lay a piece of parchment. She stepped closer, her pulse steady but unrelenting. It was old, delicate, the edges curled. And at the bottom, written in looping, careful script. Her name. The ink was faded, but it was there. Isla Whitmore. Her fingers hovered over the signature, her breath shallow. This isn't real, she whispered. Alistair's voice was gentle. It is. She shook her head, but something in her knew. And then it came. The memory. It didn't hit her like a slow trickle, didn't creep in like a whisper. It crashed into her, sharp and all-consuming, drowning her in something both foreign and familiar. A candlelit room. A white dress, different from the one she had worn in this life. Alistair standing in front of her, looking at her the way he always did. Like she was his. A vow passing between them. A promise. She had chosen him. Once. Her breath shuddered out, the weight of the revelation settling into her bones. But there was more. Another memory, cutting through like a blade. The same candlelit room, but different. A storm outside. The sound of hurried breathing, of footsteps against wood. Her own voice, breaking. I can't. Alistair's hands on her arms, firm, desperate. You swore to me. And her own voice again, splintered. I made a mistake. Her chest tightened. She had left him. Not just once. Again and again. Across lives, across time. And he had found her, again and again. The room swayed around her. The contract blurred. His presence, his pull, was unbearable now, wrapping around her, pressing against her skin, against her ribs, curling into the spaces between her memories. She looked at him, her breath uneven. This isn't love. He took a slow step forward. It is. She shook her head, stepping back. It's a cycle. His jaw tightened. It's fate. No, her voice steadied. It's a choice. His expression flickered, something unreadable, something almost like fear. And maybe that was the answer. Maybe that was what had unraveled everything before. She had always chosen to leave. And she would do it again. The house groaned as the walls seemed to press closer, his presence heavy in the air. But she wasn't drowning in it anymore. She planted her feet, bracing herself. No. Alistair's breath hitched, just slightly. Isla. She straightened. I am not yours. The words cut through the air, sharp and certain. The house trembled. The contract, once solid beneath her hands, began to fade. Alistair's expression remained composed, but his hands curled into fists. She stepped back, her voice unwavering. I choose myself. The candles flickered, casting long, twisting shadows along the walls of Astrid's studio. The air smelled of ink and something herbal, something bitter and old. Isla sat cross-legged on the floor, her pulse steady but electric, her hands pressed against the worn wood. Astrid knelt across from her, a small silver bowl between them. Inside, a single sheet of parchment rested, fragile with age, its edges curling inward like it was trying to swallow itself. The contract. The bond exists because it was made, Astrid murmured. It can be unmade. Isla's throat tightened. And if it doesn't work? Astrid met her gaze, calm as ever. Then he will find you again. Isla exhaled, her chest aching with the weight of that possibility. She had spent so many years thinking she knew herself, thinking she understood the life she had built, only to discover that her story had started long before she was even born. That her choices had been written in ink she never remembered signing. But not this time. She nodded once. Do it. Astrid reached for the parchment. The moment her fingertips touched it, the air in the room shifted. A cold gust swept through the space, rattling the windows, making the candles flicker wildly. The light seemed to bend inward, the shadows pulling toward the center of the room. And then Isla felt it. A weight, heavy, suffocating, wrapping itself around her like unseen hands gripping her shoulders. A voice, low and familiar, filled the air. Isla. Her stomach clenched. She didn't have to look to know he was there. Alistair. She could feel him, standing just beyond the circle of candlelight. Watching. Waiting. Astrid inhaled sharply, gripping the parchment tighter. It's working. The weight pressed harder, a pull that wasn't physical but felt just as strong, just as desperate. Don't do this. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't demanding. It was pleading. Isla forced herself to turn her head. Alistair stood at the edge of the room, his figure flickering, fading at the edges like ink bleeding into water. His face, so familiar now, so ingrained into the fabric of her memories, was unreadable. Except for his eyes. Not furious. Not vengeful. Just sad. And she hated it. Hated the way it tugged at her, the way a small part of her wanted to reach for him, to say I'm sorry. But she couldn't. Because this had never been about love. It had been about choice. And she was making hers. She turned back to Astrid, her hands shaking. Do it. Astrid nodded, her lips moving in a whisper Isla couldn't understand. The candle flames flared, a gust of wind spiraling around them, and the parchment burned. A sharp, hissing sound filled the air as the edges curled inward, the ink vanishing, the paper crumbling to ash in Astrid's hands. And Alistair. He shuddered. His form flickered wildly now, pieces of him coming apart like smoke in the wind. Isla looked at him, her chest tightening. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, just before the last of him faded, his lips parted, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. And then he was gone. The room stilled. The air lightened, the pressure in her chest easing, like something had finally, let go. She exhaled, her hands shaking, her vision swimming. Then everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, she was staring at the ceiling of her studio. Her head throbbed, her limbs heavy, her mouth dry. For a moment, she just lay there, breathing, feeling the weight of her own body, the reality of the space around her. Then she sat up. Everything looked normal. The soft hum of the city outside, the cluttered desk, the coffee cup still sitting where she had left it. Except. She turned toward the bookshelf. The wedding album sat there, just as before. But something about it felt different. Slowly, carefully, she reached for it, her fingers running along the edges before flipping it open. Her heart pounded. The photos were still there. The ceremony, the dancing, Elliot's awkward but earnest smile. But he was gone. Every picture where Alistair had once stood was now just empty space. Like he had never been there at all. Her fingers tightened around the page. Her breath shook. She flipped to the very last photo, the one she had been dreading. But it wasn't a wedding picture. It was something else entirely. A napkin, placed on a table, the ink slightly smudged as if written in haste. Thank you for remembering me. The air left her lungs. She traced the words with her fingertips, her vision blurring for reasons she didn't understand. Then, softly, almost to herself, she whispered, "Goodbye."